delighted to welcome Nick Laws, part of the driving force behind the marketing, content and creative services at Nest, National Employment Savings Trust. With over 7 years at the helm, Nick has been instrumental in shaping customer communications and campaigns and ensuring Nest's brand remain at the forefront of the industry. His marketing career to date spans multiple roles, from investment comms for a Scandinavian biotech, digital design at the Royal Bank of Canada, to shaping digital strategy at the University of Westminster. Nick has been at Nest for over 7 years, and during his tenure, membership to the pension scheme has grown by 344% and assets under management have grown by over 1,600%. That really is extraordinary growth. I have to say, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the Growth Engine podcast. Nick, thank you for joining us today. To kick us off, could you give us a bit of background to Nest for any listeners that aren't familiar with the business?
Sure. So Nest really started with the Pensions Act 2008, which was all about the provision of retirement within the UK. And Nest was set up as an auto-enrollment pension scheme in response to employers having to onboard employees as a pension. So it was a legal thing that they had to do, and there was a staging period for this to occur. So since its inception, it's been a bit of a success story. It has 33 billion assets under management. It has 12.5 million members, and it has 1 million employers. And around now, it's taking in around just under 500 million contributions a month. So it's quite big.
That's phenomenal, isn't it? I mean, it's a growth story. That is just a remarkable business that must come with its own challenges as well.
Yeah, definitely. And there are all sorts of things attached to that because it was set up by the government, so it's a public corporation. And so it has certain restrictions in place on how it operates, but also it has this enormous scale. Nest is really it has a public service obligation. So it's required to take any employer, whether it's profitable or not. That's not the concern. It just has to take an employer that wants to use them for their pension scheme.
The speed of growth that's gone. So I was looking through some of the numbers, and it's currently 12.5 million. Assets under management, 33 billion. Last year, to give it context of speed of growth, it was 24 billion assets under management and 11 million members. That 12-month growth, that's just phenomenal. What drives that level of growth?
The first response to that is towards the end of this period where employers had to onboard their employees into a pension scheme, there was obviously quite a lot of incentive to do that by the time the deadline came up because it was a legal requirement. So you had all these employers in the UK looking for a pension scheme to do this with. So if you were an employer and you had perhaps a small company, or let's say you were McDonald's and you had part of your workforce was rather transient and was perhaps the students who were doing a Saturday job, for example,
sure,
they weren't bringing in a lot of income per se. So to go to a pension company and say, look, I want to use you as a pension company, and they might have said, well, we're not sure that you're entirely profitable for us, or there's certain criteria we want you to meet.
I see.
So where could they go? Well, because Nest had this public service obligation to take any employer, they could turn to Nest. And so that was part of this scale thing where you suddenly got all these employers, all these members, all these contributions.
But they didn't quite fit in anyone else's box. They went to Nest.
Not necessarily so. And then on top of that, you've got the investment performance. So the target in general for Nest investments is to meet CPI plus 3%.
Right.
So if you think about that and you think about when it started, so 13 years ago, you've got this compound effect of contributions coming in and it just growing exponentially. So that's sort of like the beginning part that I think set that in train. I think the second part around that is just its overall operation and performance. So for the last 5 years running, Nest has received a 5-star rating from the de facto workplace pensions body. It was de facto does a lot of ratings for various things. And that's around its government, its value for money, how it operates. If we take the investment arm of Nest, that's recently been authorised by the FCA to provide guidance, advice to the Nest Corporation. So all these things culminate in a good operation. So you start to get proof points in your product that you can pass on to your customers. And then I think the third point to make, which is where it's incredibly unusual, is that it doesn't have shareholders.
Right.
So everything that Nest does is in the interest and for the benefit of its members. So it has a completely different perspective around that operation.
That last point there is I guess very different from perhaps some of the places that you've worked at before. How does that impact your day-to-day role?
That's a really interesting question because it is very different. I think Nest as a workplace is quite unique in that there's an element of what you might call public civil service type way of operating. Sure. You've then got a lot of what you might think as sort of the financial services sector or investment banking type people. Mm-hmm. And then you've got people with skills from across all kinds of backgrounds. That I think is very powerful. When you put that together, you get the most amazing thought process, inputs into things that perhaps you wouldn't normally have got. And certainly I could see that difference from when I worked previously, let's say at an investment bank or a biotech. The thinking was quite different. Nest is very customer-centric. And what I've noticed in a lot of marketing roles is that often what a marketing team or body want to do is communicate something to a customer. We want you to know this. Nest is very much about what does the customer want to know? How are they going to imbibe that information? What's their perspective?
Right.
So, and because of that, it has quite a strong research element to what it does to kind of surface that stuff.
Can you give me an example to kind of illustrate how it uses that, perhaps the research element of what you're doing? Sounds like that the research is very much grounded within the DNA of the company that shapes the way it starts to deliver. So is there anything you can expand on to?
Yeah, so Nest has a unit called Nest Insight, which is effectively a think tank which works with academics and across the country to surface information around how people save in the UK, specifically for pensions. So there's a lot of information around that. And we also have insight teams for campaigns that we might do. So if we talk about the premise of Nest, which is really this idea of inertia, it's behavioral economics. And the idea behind inertia is, can we change behavior without somebody having to do anything? I mean, do we change the behavior by them not doing anything? So if we think back to when all this started, when you had to get people into these pension schemes, you might have given them a choice and said, well, you can opt in, it's your choice. If you're 20 and you start work and somebody says, do you want to pay this much into your pension scheme? Particularly now, whilst you've got cost of living crisis and all those kind of things happening, you might be inclined to say, well, no, I don't want to do that. And you can't think that far ahead to when you might retire. So for me, it'll be when I'm 67, is when I get to the state retirement age. You can't think when you're in your 20s what that looks like. Naturally enough, that's really difficult. So if you invent a behavior where somebody like that doesn't have to do anything, so by default, they're opted into a pension scheme. They might not know that much about it, but they're just there. In terms of our mandate, which our mission is to help millions enjoy a better retirement, we're serving that because they're actually accumulating money into this pension scheme, into the savings. So it's around that idea of inertia, and a lot of that came from this research that was done in the early days. Things might be slightly not different, it works, but there are probably other things that you'd want to do now as the world changes and things develop. So certainly when that concept was started, I think there was the thinking that 40% of people would opt out, it'll never work. And in fact, it was only 10% of people that opted out. So
that's remarkable, really.
It did work, yeah. I mean, I think it's probably a rarity that's on such a scale that something like that was developed and used.
It's phenomenal. And thinking of, I mean, there's you read about pensions and retirements. Maybe it's because I'm of the age where I haven't quite saved as much as I would have liked into my pension pot. But you read about the impending pension retirement crisis that is heading the UK's way. I don't know if the UK is alone in this. I imagine that it's not. But is that something that the Nest considers of how do we put products in place to kind of reduce the crisis that's coming the country's way?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to its mission to help people enjoy better retirement. And I think it's something like 1 in 3 in the working population has an S pension. So our members of that's within our interest to give them the best possible financial well-being that we can. So absolutely. That ties into our whole brand, what we're about, and what we're aiming to do.
I think the fact that there's only 10% that opted out is fantastic, because if you've got people entering into the workforce, is that number still broadly?
I think it's relatively steady state. I mean, there are various things that are happening now. So you've got trends in things like transfers. So you've got a lot of companies that are starting up and can see that other pension companies have got all these people with a pension scheme, and perhaps they want to move their pension elsewhere. Yeah. And so that's a bit of competition, if you like, the idea that some people might transfer out of Nest or any other pension. As we don't have shareholders, for us, it's not about financial gain. It's about, is that in the best interest of that member to do that? Yeah. Which is a slightly different angle. But that's now coming up, and that might affect, if you think about that 1 in 3 in the UK, that might affect those sorts of outcomes. Yeah. When you get to the state retirement age, I can't remember the exact figure now, but it's something like just over £10,000. I think it's 10,400. Mm-hmm. So if you think now what you earn, and you think, let's say you retire, I don't know, but might be 67. Yeah. Is that going to be enough for you to live off? Yeah. Or are you going to have the lifestyle that you want? Yeah. So you do need to have, well, in my view, you need to have this extra support. I
think the fact that the dialogue is much more like, when I was entering into the workforce, the pension was last thing on my mind, and I kick myself now. And of course, I've got one of those friends that was like the most important thing, and it was just. And now, it really, you see the difference. And so I think what Nest is doing is performing a fabulous service. And I wish I could rewind the clock.
It's never too late. It's never too late. I mean, pensions are really complex. They are really difficult. They're not easy things to understand. And when Nest was set up, part of its premise was these 8 golden rules of communication. Right. So one of the things that it wanted to do was it didn't want to come across as saying, you must have a pension. So we've said, later in life, it would be useful to have good financial well-being. But we're not here to tell you, you've got a choice, right? So how do you position that in your communications? How do you work that out? So one of the things they said, well, instead of telling you what to do, actually, did you know it's your right? You're entitled to that. You're entitled to that pension, or well-being later in life, however you want to term it. And that puts the customer at the centre of what it is. And that makes them feel more connected, more confident, and in control. So those 3 values, that's in our communications, that's what we use. And there was a lot of study done on the use of language. I mean, I get letters now where the financial jargon, unless you're from that world, that stuff, it's really difficult. Yeah. It's really hard to understand. So putting it into plain English is always the number one priority, because how do people understand this?
When I was looking at Nest's site, and I did mention this to you when we spoke previously, I thought that the way, the tone of voice and the way that the communications are laid out, the information on the site is so clear. It's so easy to understand. And I actually thought it's fabulous. I did a lot of research for another client within investments. We had to interview savers who weren't investing to find out why they weren't investing. And I think this was based on a stat that there was something like £3.3 trillion sitting in UK bank accounts actually losing money. Why not putting it into investments? And the overriding argument was when I go onto these websites, the language is impenetrable. It makes me feel stupid. When I read this stuff, I don't understand it. It makes me feel stupid and I recoil from it. If you're a business, having potential clients recoil from your communications is not a good place to be. And Nest, when you look at that, and any listeners, any marketers, I'd urge you to go and have a look. You've clearly put a lot of thought into really stripping that back just to make it as simple and easy to understand and penetrable.
There is. I mean, we have teams that work on this. You also have a compliance element as well. There's a balance to be met. So sometimes you have to convey something that's very technical. We will always put it into plain English. That's what people understand. That's what's going to work. There's always that level of how much can you say before somebody starts to switch off, because often putting things in plain language or spelling things out effectively, using more words. And one of the things we notice in communications, if they get very wordy, because we're not used to reading so much copy now in email campaigns or on websites and so on, you may start to lose people. So there's always a content design element to the communication and also a UX element. So we might do some email campaigns and we might want to test how those work with the subject lines, what resonates, perhaps with the creative as well. At one point we did a test with the visuals. We're very lucky that we have a member panel. So we've got an insight team that works with us and have this panel of our customers, and we can put things out there and test them. So at one point, and this is a really typical sort of marketing thing to do, I think, we were thinking, well, okay, we need to show images of people enjoying themselves in retirement. It's such a positive thing, great. So we put all these pictures together and we found these images of people having a holiday and they were on the beach and all this kind of stuff. And we put it out to the panel, and all the stuff that we thought was going to work really well, they couldn't stand. They didn't like it. And they said, that's not going to be my retirement.
Yeah.
Now that may be because of financial issues, or maybe that's just not where their interest lay. But the point was that we as marketers had an idea in our heads that we thought would work, and it was complete rubbish. And it's all to do with context as well, the message you're trying to convey, but certainly other things such as a sort of a nature scene with a pathway resonated a bit more than some of those other images I was talking about. The ultimate nirvana with it was that people wanted to see themselves in how you were talking to, because that's what they resonate with.
Of course.
With 12.5 million members, that's difficult. And you need quite a lot of technology to be able to tailor those communications. But we do know, and that's also from the Nest Insight sort of think tank that we were talking about earlier, which set up with the Inertia concept, that those people that are proactive in making their decisions tend to be more committed when they look at their finances, are more likely to have a better financial outcome, better financial well-being.
Let me just make sure I understand that. So when you say people that are more proactive, meaning people that are more proactive in taking the decisions about their financial future?
Decisions in general.
Okay.
So again, it's just that behavior thing.
Okay.
And then it correlates to when they look at their finances, they're more likely to then say, okay, well, maybe I need to increase my contributions.
Got it.
So there's a lovely test. I really like this one where, you get coffee stamps.
Yes, yeah.
When you go to the cafe and get the coffee. So let's say you've got a stamp card and it's got 8 stamps in it, and you know that if you get another 2 stamps, you're going to get free coffee. Well, there was a test done that showed if you've got 8 stamps, psychologically you've got a trigger that says, I need to complete the card. I've only got 2 left, so I need to complete the card. And then on top of that, and I get free coffee.
Yeah.
So if you think of the coffee shop, they're getting 10 coffees and they only had to pay for 1 coffee themselves, right? So that psychology of behavior can be a really big influencer, the think, feel part of it.
Yes, yeah. I was reading about, I forget the name of this, I was reading about this effect. I think it's the same one. And if a user can see the distance that they have to achieving their goal, then they're more likely to complete it. And it starts off in the old days, I'm going to show my age now, but when you used to load up computer games with cassettes, there used to be this progress bar that used to slowly crawl up But it kind of kept you watching, like glued to this, and whilst you're hearing this awful kind of noise in the background. Modern day version of that is Uber showing you the car on its way to meet you. It's going to be 6 minutes till your driver gets here. It's to stop you from going, and I'll get a bus. And it's all of these things, and it's incredible how much once you realize that and you start spotting it all around you, and it works. It's fantastic.
So imagine if you went back in time and you mentioned, had I done more with my pension, let's say when you're in your 20s,
yes.
and somebody said to you, put in an extra 25 quid a month, what that would be now.
Yeah.
So it's how you do that. I mean, it's difficult, but it's
Yes.
looking at those behavioural things, I think, which is really key.
Yeah. What a fascinating role to be doing this and being able to impact 12.5 million individuals.
I'm very lucky. I work with a fantastic member engagement team, a fantastic employer engagement team.
Mm-hmm.
So together, we come out with these fantastic communications that really do start to turn the dial. And I think the future for Nest is very bright.
Can you expand on that? What are you looking there to improve? Is, again, presumably, as you said at the beginning of the conversation, customer experience is central to everything. So what elements in particular are you looking to kind of improve?
Yeah. So it's a very interesting question, because we mentioned this idea of inertia, and we know that inertia works. But we also said, if you're somebody that's able to make decisions, and you can make decisions around finances, that might give you a better financial well-being. So awareness is probably a key thing. And I said that, it's about 1 in 3 of the working population M&S pension. But the initial immediate response to Nest as a brand is actually quite low.
Right.
And I think that's because it hasn't been needed. We haven't needed to do that. But if we want to support people in providing guidance and making them feel that they're in control of that financial well-being in their future and their retirement, we need to think slightly differently about how we do that now. So looking at how, as a brand, we can become more trusted than we are at the moment, perhaps. Looking as a brand where we can reach the sweet spot where somebody says, look, I don't need to look elsewhere. I'm really comfortable in Nest because it's doing everything I need it to do. And I feel confident about that. I'm okay with that. At the moment, it's probably hard for some of our members to even know that Nest exists, because, if you get onboarded, I don't know, 10 years ago to an employer, you might not remember, you might not have all that in your head. So I think that's probably a direction that will be looked at.
It's a unique brand. It's a unique business. Most organizations, brand awareness is something they need in order to reach, the growth. You've got a completely different trajectory as a brand and business, in that you had an exponential growth. And now you're kind of like starting to think from a brand awareness point of view that that's almost like a second tier piece for you, isn't it? Do you see where I'm getting? It's almost like reverse from perhaps many of your competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you react to the environment around you as well. So Nest is relatively new. I mean, it's 13 years. So in 10 years, we'll have to see how everything looks. I think it's forecast at the end of the next decade that Nest is expected to have something like 100 billion assets under management. So that also comes with enormous responsibility. Yeah. So there's a lot to do. Although we've said we've got these things like inertia and we want to increase awareness, it might sound like we don't need to do anything. I don't think that's the case. That's not in the interest of people that are saving with Nest. We need to do as much as we can, and it might also include things like our investment strategy as well. So I think Nest was one of the first pension schemes to withdraw from tobacco investments, for example, and there were 2 reasons for that. I think one, just as a long-term investment, was it good? Yeah, I think it was deemed that it wasn't going to be as successful as other investments might be. And the second one is it has quite a strong environmental take on its investments at Nest. It's also very strong on environmental and social governance and how companies run.
You report on number of active versus inactive members as well. And presumably that is a number as well that you want to be stimulating and making sure as part of the mandate, trying to make sure that people are active within their savings, but presumably keeping customers, as I would imagine that you have competition that is trying to win some of your clients as well, and presumably retaining them must be part of your objectives.
Yes. So, I mean, you're always going to get this high number of contributions coming in.
Yeah.
I think it's something like 55% of our membership is under the age of 40. So, roughly, depending on the circumstances, but they might decide to retire at state age. So you've got all that time of that pension growth. And so they might be, depending on their awareness of Nest and pension schemes in general, they might be taken in by an advert for another pension company saying, transfer to us,
Sure.
we operate like this, or we've got these things. So having that awareness part and that brand loyalty and that brand trust is actually really crucial. We want to make sure that's in the interest of the members. So if you transfer to another pension scheme, it might be that the charges are higher than they are at Nest. So is that to your benefit? It might be that the investment returns historically haven't been as strong, or perhaps they invest in things that aren't attuned to your lifestyle, your values. So there are lots of things around that. So could Nest continue because it's got all these contracts? Yes, but it wants to do the best that it can. So I think it's absolutely crucial that it does the best it can for its members, and that means building up its brand awareness.
Yeah, and I think there's also something there which is empowering your members to be educated enough so that they can make those decisions and be exactly the points. Ask themselves the questions. Well, should I be comparing fees, or because again, it's, I don't mean this disrespectfully, it's not rocket science, is it? But you've got to understand that if there's a service and you've got different providers, things are going to stack up in different ways. And if you can have an informed decision to be able to say, okay, I'm going to choose one provider over another one, if you can empower your members to be asking the right type of questions, they can make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue we'd probably never say that. I mean, I think to some people it might be rocket science, and quite rightly so. I mean, the average salary for people at Nest is, I think it's between 20 and 22,500, something like that is the average salary. So a lot of those, if you think people that are on that salary and you think they've got to pay rent, they've got to, pay bills, all those kinds of things, then that's not that much money to play with to say, oh, look at what your future might be and you could go and do this. It's probably unlikely that they will have a retirement where they're going to the south of France every summer and having these fantastic holidays. I mean, some might if they've got big incomes.
More about making sure that they've got enough to maintain a lifestyle.
Right. Have you got the wherewithal to be able to make those decisions, even at that? Because whatever that cost value is to you personally, that's in relation to you and what's going to work for you. So you're absolutely right. Getting informed and making the right decisions is absolutely crucial. But it's still relatively new, the idea of pensions, the complexity around. I mean, most people won't know, for example, that they're effectively investors. They've got investments, right?
Yeah.
That's not because you've got, well, most pensions now defined contribution and defined benefit was based on the final salary scheme. But a lot of people won't understand that. And actually, if you were with a pension scheme like Nest, where it's got this enormous scale, you can influence what companies do. You've got voting rights. Nest's got voting rights to say, well, actually, we're not happy that your board is made up of white men, age 50 or something like that. So there are a lot of messages, lots of things to consider. But at the end of the day, probably for most people, it's just, have I got some savings to live off? Am I going to be okay? Average
investors that are members of Nest, how regularly are you communicating with them? Can you communicate to them individually?
It's all to do with the GDPR and whether they give us consent to market to them or not. We have a mandate to provide guidance to our members. So if that guidance is around, I I know, for example, nominating a beneficiary, for example, then you're allowed to do that. That's okay. In terms of just sending out emails about any kind of activity at Nest, those campaigns are quite measured. So we might send, for example, 300,000 emails out. We might get an open rate of, say, 250,000, something like that, which is relatively high. So we're careful about how we communicate, because members will also get operational communications as well.
Okay.
And it's again about that relationship and that awareness of Nest, of when the email comes in or what they see. So you've got all the channels like social media stuff, and you've got the website. But it's interesting that it's not like a bank account. So your employer puts you into this, right?
Yeah.
So you might never look at it. It's depending on, again, that thing about how active you are.
We've talked a little bit about test and learn. Is there more that we want to dive into on that?
So on test and learn, there's that example where we might say send out 300,000 emails.
Yeah.
And I think one of the really powerful things about where you've got scale is from that first 10,000 batch emails you send, you could try sending, 10 different subject lines. You could try sending different creatives. When you see the trend come back from that 10,000, that's the email that you then want to send to your 290,000 that you've got left over. And I think there's a real concern in marketing circles that if you know something works, just keep doing it and not trying another way. But actually, if you see that something doesn't work so well, that's quite useful, because you keep that in your back pocket and you know that those elements for any future campaign in the context of what you're doing aren't going to operate very well. So testing and learning all the time is really pivotal. So it's, it's the UX thing that people do with websites, of course, and you're constantly developing and iterating your website. It's the same with your communications. I think financial services are perhaps more wary of doing that kind of thing, but I think it definitely pays dividends.
When we last spoke, we talked about test and learn methodology, but specifically remember you talking about cyber fraud and what you've learned around that with test and learn. Is there? Can you expand on that for me?
Yes, so cyber fraud is obviously very prevalent, and there's a lot of it about particularly scammers who want to get hold of people's pension pots.
Of course.
So it's a really big thing, and obviously that comes in the form of an email, mostly to people like phishing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what we found with the emails that we did was there were certain elements that we needed to keep consistent around the design of the email, which related to the website. So people had trust that it was Nest. A lot of emails that you do, you often want to have just one call to action because it's simple. You don't want to give people choice because then they might not click on anything. And you've also got learned habits with emails. So when people open an email, particularly on the phone, they see a subject line, they might skim the content, they see the button, they just naturally click on the button because that's what they've learned to do.
Right.
So if you put all that together, you need a really clean communication. So if you're consistently sending those emails, you want to keep consistent visual elements and the way that you speak the same.
Yes.
But what we also found is that you can have ancillary information with an email. So that might be towards the bottom of the email where you talk about phishing or cybercrime, and then you link out to a web page that talks more about it. And you might also back that up with social media. So when you have your visual identity that you're using with these communications, you keep it consistent across all the channels, and then it just builds up this body of evidence that it's legitimate because it's everywhere. That's what I'm seeing. That's what I recognize. I know it's bona fide.
When it's from a cyber fraud perspective, do you if you do make changes, do you see like an influx of inquiries coming in saying, I'm not sure if this is right, or do you get that?
I mean, we do get queries. So we have a service team that takes queries. And it does happen. It doesn't happen that often, I believe. So we mentioned that we might send 300,000 emails, for example. I mean, you'll always get queries around logging in, that kind of stuff, but nothing too specific around cybercrime. So we think that that's working and that's doing its job.
Yeah. And I imagine, again, with the mandate that you have going forward by the end of the decade, the cyber crime is going to become an issue that you're increasingly dealing with. is there any steps that you can talk about that to mitigate those risks?
I can only say that we are particularly hot on information security within the organization. I mean, just internally how we work, let alone externally.
Yeah.
I don't know of any initial changes that are going to occur. I only know that it's at the forefront of what we do, ensuring that our members' pots are safe and secure.
It's a moving beast, isn't it? Cyber security. We have updates from our info security team, and it's mind-boggling. And I think it's something that, as marketers working in financial services, I suspect in the future it will start to impact our world within the communications that we have to put out, because it's definitely not going away. Anyway, that's just a personal viewpoint. I appreciate you probably can't say more from this perspective. Coming back again to the those phenomenal growth targets. Brendan McCafferty anticipates reaching 100 billion by the end of the decade. From a marketing perspective, what are the elements that are going to contribute to reaching that target?
Certainly in how we communicate with members, so the ease of managing that pension scheme and that how you're going to interact with the product. So they have forecast that they're going to develop an app which will do that.
Right.
There's a digital transformation program that's going to look at how we are set up. And again, that's around enablers. So from a marketing point of view, I think personalized communications, we already do that, but we could do it to a greater extent with a new technical infrastructure in place. And that will be crucial. And then bringing in this idea of the brand again and the idea of trust with Nest. We go to that 1 in 3 of the UK that has a pension of the working population that has a pension of Nest. You want Nest to become a household name like BBC or something like that. So I think there are a lot of exciting challenges to make that happen. And I think our immediate strategy will be around what that transformation does and how we grow that awareness in a positive way for our members.
That sounds an exciting couple of years that you've got ahead of you to start designing what that looks and feels like. What's the support team look like around you that you have to help you go on that journey?
So I think we're incredibly lucky where we are. So we have a team of designers, content writers, we have project managers, we have service team people. We mentioned we had this excellent member engagement team, an excellent employer engagement team. So this is based within the corporation. And then we have a scheme administrator, and the scheme administrator is effectively doing the technical bit of processing the contributions into the pot, managing that part of the product. So the corporation itself is relatively small in comparison. So I think we're roughly 350 employees, something like that. But the Nest experience part of the corporation is one of the bigger parts, and that's really the engine in getting the communications out and to our members.
Right. Now, I'm going to throw in a slightly curveball question here, and this is based upon another conversation I've had with a guest that's coming onto the podcast next. So perhaps you can help me prepare for that. In your career, you've worked at different types of organisations within marketing. And when we started to have a pre-call with this other guest, the conversation started to go around how marketing in financial services can be different to marketing in other industries. We spoke about the difference between FMCG, and I know you haven't worked in FMCG, but just out of interest, how do you see the role of marketing perhaps compared to other industries that you have worked in?
The emphasis on data-led marketing is really coming to the fore. And in previous roles, there was a lot more emphasis around what looked good.
Yeah.
Less around quite knowing how a customer or the person you're marketing to imbibed that, what they really thought of it, because you have to do the research to know that. I think in some of the financial institutions where I've worked before, there's also a lot of money and there was relationships that are already there. So the level of marketing required, I think much of it was reputational as much as whether it was actually required to increase a profit or onboard someone. So it is very different. I mean, I've mentioned where I'm now, there aren't shareholders. There's a slightly different emphasis on what you do. But the data part of it, I mean, even looking at how creative works, that wasn't something that, 10 years ago was being mentioned to the degree in which I'm seeing it where I work now. So I think people always say marketing is about data, and most people have got CRM and that kind of stuff. But this think and feel behind it and having data with proof points around it, I think is the really essential bit that is coming out. From
listening to you, it seems to be and I don't know if this is too broad a brushstrokes, but it seems that it's very data driven, the marketing at Nest, but combined with the behavioral psychology aspects, and it seems that it's the meeting of those two. Is that
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That gives me some prep for the next one. You've done a varied role within your career. I'm interested to know what's a useful piece of wisdom that you've heard, or some learning that perhaps a mentor or you've read somewhere that you use as part of your day-to-day that helps you be a better marketer. Is there anything you could share with us?
There is, and it's more around leadership, but your leadership in marketing or communications, whatever you want to call it. And there's a book that's called, and I'm going to use a rude word now, and it's called No Bullshit Leadership, and it's by Chris Hurst. And Chris Hurst used to work in advertising. And so there are lots of relevant stories around what he experienced at work, and what he thinks now about how you achieve your strategy. So just how do you get there? And I think it's having, you can have strength and conviction, but if you're in a financial institution or you're working somewhere where that's difficult to implement, how do you go about it? And marketing always has so many views.
Right.
There are all many, you go to board and they'll have a view. Everybody will have a view. They may be right, or it might be slightly off key from what you know. So again, that data, however small it is, I think is really, really pivotal.
Yes.
I mean, Google didn't become as successful as it is without knowing what people were searching for, right? And at it. So I think even small nuggets can help you with the evidence. But I think that's probably one of the key things that I've learned is your stuff, you've got some evidence to back it up. Or if you don't have the evidence, test and learn it. And it's okay if it doesn't work, because you've just learned that doesn't work and not to use it again.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for giving us all your insights and sharing your wisdom from a remarkable story of the growth story of Nest. I wish you and all your colleagues all the best in reaching your mind-focusing targets by 2030.
Thank you.
Thank you. Today we discussed leveraging the role of inertia to the precise art of test and learn methodology. Nick also shed light on the brand's accessibility and trust-building efforts, highlighting the significance of a clear tone of voice and purposeful communications. Reflecting on today's discussion, one key takeaway remains. In the challenging world of financial marketing, authenticity is paramount. I'm grateful to Nick for sharing his wisdom and expertise. Thank you again for listening today to The Growth Engine. If you enjoyed this episode and like to hear more, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from, and follow us on LinkedIn for regular updates or on hubagency.co.uk. Thank you very much, and see you next time.